And I like to say everybody should get what they want. But the first challenge of that is figuring out what you want. The second challenge is telling people what you want.
Welcome to That Pivotal Moment of Change, the podcast that's not about what you do, but how you got to where you are. Let's dive into the twists, the turns, and defining moments that shape our careers. Today, we're speaking with Jack Teuber, a seasoned leader who spent over 3 decades at PwC, charting a unique path from journalism to digital media and eventually leading PwC's in-house creative agency as a managing director. Post-retirement, Jack continues to challenge himself as an actor, photographer, and GED tutor. In this episode, Jack shares his insights on building trust, embracing failure, and adapting to change in both professional and personal life. With humor and hard-earned wisdom, Jack's story is a powerful guide for anyone looking to pursue a career full of growth and transformation.
Hey, Jack, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ryan. Great to see you.
Thank you very much for being here. I'm really glad to have you here and learn more about your career journey. Before we get into your career at PwC, let's talk a little bit about what you're up to today.
So I retired actually after 32 years at PwC in December. And my last role there, the actual role for the last 12 years, was the creative leader of the firm as a managing director at the firm. And in that time, I've spent the past really 7 months learning how to be retired, unlearning my workday habits and developing new habits as somebody who is sort of free of other people's expectations and desires. And so for the past 7 months, I've really broken my life down into probably 3 areas. First is I've been acting as a background actor, so an extra for the rest of the world in sort of TV and movies, which has been really fun. I've had some of the highs. I saw myself on the screen in a Law & Order SVU as a wedding guest. A little plug here. I'm going to be in the upcoming Penguin series on HBO, or at least I hope I am. The interesting thing about background work is you do the work, and then you actually have to watch the show or the commercial or the movie to see whether or not you made the final cut. And I would tell you, and this is a bit of a digression, but as somebody who's spent my life, in and around the creative world, watching the teamwork that goes into pulling some of these big productions together. I mean, we did a lot of video at PwC. We made a lot. We had a beautiful video studio. We did a lot of work in that space. It is, when I say night and day, that may not even be the best comparison. The number of people that have to be coordinated to pull off a scene, and then the amount of effort that goes into, for example, that Law & Order scene. I was one of 200 wedding guests in a church, in the city that was actually decorated like it was a real wedding. We came dressed for a spring wedding, and lo and behold, we spent 4.5 hours filming a scene that maybe got them 1.5 minutes of airtime, right? So it's the amount of work that goes into the quality kind of productions we're talking about. It's amazing. So that's been a big part. It's been a learning journey for me, and after a long time of being the guy in charge, I've really enjoyed just listening to people telling me what to do, which people who know me are a little surprised at, but it's kind of nice not to have to make those decisions. I've been doing some GED tutoring as well. I started my career as a writer. I was a journalist for a long time. And so I'm helping people who are looking to earn their GEDs write their essays. And that's been really, that fulfills a part of me, the sort of service-oriented part, in a really nice way, because I get to connect with individuals who are highly motivated to get their GEDs. And these are people of all age spectrums with really interesting life stories, but with a common goal. So that's been good. And so anybody who's listening, reach out to your local community and see whether there's an opportunity there to contribute that way. It's really fulfilling. And the third is I've been spending a lot of time with photography. It was always something I was interested in. And, as a creative leader of the firm, I was responsible for all the creative that we did, but I didn't actually get to do much of it myself. Had a lifelong interest in photography that sort of ebbed and flowed as other things came up. And about now 3 years ago, I really got back into it big time with a trip out west to the national parks. And so I started out, hardcore with nature photography, like many men my age. I will say maybe for sure many people my age. I've gotten into birding. So birds have caused me to buy more lenses to get better shots of them. And lately, for the past 10 months or so, I've been working with models.
I mean, you're doing a ton of really interesting things. I'm curious where the acting piece came from.
Yeah, I think it was largely, I like to see how things are put together. That's a kind of just a fascination of mine. And I have some friends who are, SAG union members who are in productions that are on, but friends in things like Maisel and whatnot, friends with a lot of performers in the city. I was asking questions about how they bring some of those scenes together. And, one of my friends really encouraged me and said, you'd be great at this because you could play a lot of different looks. You should be look into it. And one of the things that I hadn't really considered, my retirement decision was sort of made in a rather compressed time frame. Like, how was I going to replace the social interaction I get at work? And I think that, we talk about work and we have, our work colleagues and our friends we make at work. But I think one of the things that was really clear to me as I was thinking about retirement is I spend all of this time working with other people. What's it going to be like to be, not doing that anymore? And I was looking for an opportunity where I could, in fact, engage with people. And frankly, I'm a curious individual, probably curious in all respects of that word. But where I would get the chance to, meet new people and do new things. And this is definitely that. The world of background acting is full of fascinating people who all have their interesting stories. And I'm a bit of a, I've done some storytelling in my time, and I love getting other people to tell their stories to me. So that's been it filled that, I won't call it a social need, or at least a perceived need for a community, particularly during the day when all of my friends are still working.
I'm looking forward to seeing you on the screen. So let's talk a little bit about PwC. I think you had a truly impressive career at PwC. You were there for a long time. Could you talk about what you did and how your journey there started out?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have an interesting and non-linear journey, and just as an aside, I'd say that I think that if you look at your own career and you look at the career of people who you respect and respect their opinions and guidance, a lot of times you're going to find that it's non-linear. They've done a lot of things, and PwC is a giant organization that when I went into it, it was actually Coopers and Lybrand. So I started working way back, right in the 1980s, 1989 in fact. And it was strictly an accounting firm. And a lot of people were like, well, why are you an accounting firm? And the story to that is I was a Capitol Hill journalist at the beginning of my career. So for the basically 6 years between when I graduated college and started at Coopers and Lybrand, I worked on Capitol Hill as a reporter for a lot of known within industries, but relatively unknown trade publications. Got to see the sausage making of legislation up close. I sort of built my reputation in the world of tax journalism, which financial and tax journalism, which a lot of people roll their eyes at. But it was, for me, it was interesting because it was politics. But I developed some subject matter expertise in finance and tax, and ended up at Coopers and Lybrand writing for them, basically books, articles, speeches. I was a ghostwriter, a corporate ghostwriter, and this is when big organizations like that produced books pretty regularly. And so I was the guy for tax. And it was good because it really built on my business acumen that I didn't have. And it also, I never thought I'd be happy working in a large organization. Just my own sort of personality leads me to think, oh, I want to work for the underdog and the little guy. But what I found is that big organizations are actually made up of a lot of small organizations, and the people around you are your organization. But the opportunities working in a large organization allowed me to sort of move and take advantage of opportunities. So for the first 4 years I was there, that's what I did. I wrote, and I wrote books, newsletters, articles, speeches, whatever. And then I actually got back into publishing. Not, journalism a little less than publishing, more on the business side, more on the how are we going to do this side, just as the internet was coming online. But I got into the publishing world that was doing a lot of electronic publishing. So I began to blend my journalism background with the business background, with the digital background. And within a couple of years, the people at Coopers and Lybrand were recognizing the possibilities of digital and asked me if I wanted to come back and do something else besides what I was doing. So I basically was there in kind of again, I worked for the tax practice, which I know some people may drop off right now saying, how credible could this guy be as a tax guy? But I'm, and taking, we had an internal audience that we had to communicate to, but we also had an external audience of clients. And so beginning to harness the internet for that was important. And we offered and developed a private community for corporate tax professionals, which had no other way to get together like the rest of us other than meeting physically, right? Or maybe a large, heavily moderated conference call. And we did very well. We won some awards for what we did. And then I was asked to sort of take my show on the road and do what I did in the US and do it for the firm globally from Amsterdam. So I worked in Amsterdam for 5 years doing kind of, I'll call it internet stuff, because that's really the big bucket it fit in. And it was a lot of internal networking. And I'm not talking about connecting the LAN. I'm talking about getting people to appreciate what a more connected organization could be like and how it could benefit, our clients, the bottom line, our own careers, et cetera. So I was really a digital pioneer back then when people just fully didn't understand it.
For me, when I started to get interested in digital was the late 90s. And one of the first classes I took was in a program called Director. And there's a programming language called Lingo. And really, it was for CD-ROMs. And the internet was a thing, but nobody really, I don't think at that point, still fully understood where it could go. And I remember I had this moment where I thought CD-ROMs was the future. And if I could get really good at making CD-ROMs, I'm going to have this big, brilliant career. And a few years later, I realized that thinking was way out of date.
You got into that because you had good peripheral vision, right? And I think that this is, my career is, if I have one superpower professionally, it's probably peripheral vision and just trying to figure out where the landscape is and where it's going. Real quickly to get to the heart of the question you asked 5 minutes ago, I was asked to take on leadership of the PwC.com global presence. So my digital journey sort of continued, and then I elevated from just the tax part of the firm, and there were several parts of the firm, to be responsible for our web presence at a time, and this is like 2000 and maybe 3, where people still didn't grasp how the internet could be used, and particularly in a business where we work on a daily basis with clients, and it's a very personal business in terms of there's a lot of trust involved, a lot of communication. How is this going to help us? And really trying to pioneer what we could do with .com for the firm on a global basis as well. And at that time, the world was quite fragmented in that different territories within the network had different online presences, and it was a matter of uniting them all and bringing them all together. And I got to do some really amazing research, which I believe I have somewhere here in my house, on what on really watching people use websites, and that was literally 20 years ago. And I did that for a number of years. And in 2012, given my sort of digital chops, I was asked to create a creative team, right, or an in-house agency for PwC. And really, I should rephrase that. I was asked to unite the creative assets within the firm, which existed in pockets. It was, the firm existed in a largely geographically dispersed way because that's where our clients are. And how do I create one organization? And then in that process, I evolved it to be an in-house agency. So I took you could argue 4 different groups doing different, sometimes overlapping things, and turned them into a cohesive whole. And at the time, I was a real outlier within anybody who was doing in-house work, because we were a kind of a virtual and distributed organization. We had people who were locally based all around the country. And, my thinking was not, okay, well, we need to have everybody in one building in one place, so we need to make everybody move or find new people. Or I didn't think that made sense. We had relationships, we had skills. We didn't really need to go out and get new people. We just needed to figure out a good way to use the people we had where we were. So we went, virtual way before, the pandemic, and it clearly helped us through that. But I started that and built it out. And by the time I retired, I had about 115 people in the US and Mexico. another couple hundred offshore. And we, at one point, 2019, were the in-house agency of the year. I no longer, I returned the trophy back to the folks at PwC. But I had in-house agency of the year, which was like a real capstone on my career, I felt, but also, and it really had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with the team that executed every day.
And that is an amazing run at one company, especially a company as large as PwC. And I think you were there for over 26 years.
32 years, and I think longer if you don't count that gap, right? And you don't count that couple of years gap I took. So I started in '89 and I left at the end of 23.
Going into PwC, and I know at the time it wasn't PwC, but did you think that would have been such a long career move for you?
100% not. As a journalist, especially the young journalist, you move from organization to organization. So my CV was move, move, move. Ironically, my brother, who's a little bit older than me, got his CPA and was at PwC. And I used to mock him for, being an accountant, right, at PwC. And lo and behold, I go, he leaves, and I'm the one who ends up at PwC. And not only that, I end up staying for my whole career, right, which were not my whole career, but the majority of my career. So no, I had no idea. And in fact, I did leave, and I left with the intention of getting back into journalism. But when, PwC, approached me about getting back, using digital publishing to benefit the firm, I knew the people I was going to go be working for, and the people were not the problem when I left. I really liked the people, right? It's just that I wanted to be a writer. I might as well be a writer someplace where writing is the end product as opposed to a byproduct.
It's always interesting to me when somebody starts off on one path and they really end up going down a completely different.
Yeah, I think especially today. I mean, today is an interesting time because there's new tech that pops up all the time, right? And if you think about the internet was this massive wave but it was a slow building wave, and a lot of people were scratching their heads. And I think for a lot of people who are probably listening to this, maybe their first encounter with digital life was, for my daughters, it was having, an AOL chat account and, those kinds of communities that were formed, in the early 2000s and carried on. And people thought it was just sort of a time waster and how can you use it for business? And so businesses were slow to get on. I think the opposite is true now. Every new technology, people immediately identify as, how do we use this to lower costs, increase speed to market, improve quality. So there's all this stuff happening out there. And now it's a question of like which horse to bet on, right? And the bet is now when you're kind of all in with your career.
What are some key lessons you've learned throughout your career that you would like to share with others?
So I think there's like probably two categories where I'd put these lessons into. One is there's a people side of it, right? Which is, who in an organization do you look up to? Who do you trust? Whose opinion do you value to help you navigate the organization and by proxy your career? We talk about my career. I could use me, but I will tell you that I had so many mentors and so many people who were interested in giving me opportunities, and I may have been a safe pair of hands, which, in large organizations, that's always a good thing to be, but you need to have people know who you are. You need to have people understand what you're capable of. And so that is figuring out what you want. The second challenge is telling people what you want, right? And I think that if you have mentors, you can tell them what you want. And there are discussions that are always happening, in rooms, online now, in Slack, wherever, where people are saying, hey, I think we ought to go in this direction. And if somebody knows that what you want jives with that direction, they can say, hey, I got somebody over here who might be perfect for that, right? Somebody who we trust and taking. So I think that, like, looking up and who is taking care of you when you're not in the room, and I don't mean taking care of in a paternal way, but who is looking out for your career. And I think on the flip side of that, as I became more senior and had more people reporting to me, being that person and recognizing that everybody who works for you has goals that may not always be the same goals. And so understanding what their goals are so they can help you. I mean, we've all had people, leave and go on to do great things. I had one of my video guys left the firm a couple of years ago to go work for Francis Ford Coppola on his Zoetrope film. And when somebody tells you they're gonna leave PwC to go work for Francis Ford Coppola, you're like, I guess I did my job. This guy got the skills and the exposure to be able to build himself up to go do that, right? And so I think there's a reward for me, at least. I didn't ever felt like I was losing people. I felt as though I had succeeded in my mission of giving people the opportunities they needed. So that was one big one. But the flip side of that is trust. And I think you've heard me talk about this in other contexts. To be that mentor and to be that person who people will actually tell you what they want, when what they want may not exactly jive with what maybe the corporate interest would be at that moment, they've got to trust that you actually care about them. And they trust that what they tell you, you will not take in turn and say, well, you said you were going to leave, so I'm not going to give you any good assignments. It's rather the other way around. It's like, well, what can we help you do? And recognizing that for a lot of people, I was an outlier that I stayed there for so long. And I recognize that that's probably not what, everybody wants. And why not help them get what they want? Because I'd rather have people out in the world thinking good thoughts about me and their time at PwC than feel stuck in a cage and leaving anyway and just feeling bad about it.
100% agree with everything you just said. And it really comes down to people and caring about people and developing that trust along the way.
Yeah. And I think this idea of a career journey, if you think about yourself and then you look at other people, they're on that same journey. And just because you have a job, it doesn't mean it's your career. And understanding that people might want something different than they have. They might go into a large organization because they think the organization is a great employer, so they got a job that they could, and they're hoping to move laterally. And we've had people do that as well, and it's all good, right? I mean, I believe that there's no such thing as too much happiness in the world, and we don't really talk about happiness in a corporate context. I think we probably should spend a little bit more time doing that. But happier people are more motivated people, and people who know that you have their back. Also, know that when you have bad news to deliver or tough news to deliver, that you're not blowing smoke, right? And you're being honest and forthright, and that trust factor, even in a bad news situation, there's a greater degree. I'll use the word happiness maybe advisedly here, but the transparency and trust are helpful in those contexts.
What are some of the bigger challenges you faced in your career?
Well, a lot of times I was doing something new that hadn't been done before, right? And so figuring out, okay, what are we going to do with this? And I think in corporate America, we talk about boiling the ocean a lot. We never want to boil the ocean. Right? I think there's one truth: we never want to boil the ocean. I don't miss any of that corporate speak, by the way. But I do think understanding where you can make a difference, where you can show a win, and the challenge of working with something like the internet, where people were skeptical that it could help. Okay, where can we show that it will help, right? So that was sort of a broad challenge, but that is a challenge, to be honest with you, that lasted for years, and convincing people and earning their trust, and working in a large organization where you have all kinds of personality types and people process information differently, recognizing that not everybody thinks the same as you, which may sound like, kind of psychology 101. But I really benefited from a lot of professional development that helped me understand, like, for example, I'm not very, say, quanti or rational, right? But I recognize that a lot of people base their decisions on real cost benefits analysis that are in spreadsheets. And my insistence that I didn't need that, wouldn't fly, right? So learning to overcome some of my own internal blind spots was huge. And learning to speak the language, not just of a large organization like PwC, because a large organization like PwC speaks a zillion languages. The diversity of the people there, but also the diversity of the leadership, and what will convince one person, right? My hunch that I started social media at PwC among my adventures, right? So one of my big challenges there was to convince an organization that has, quite a robust risk management function, that this was something that we needed to do both as an organization, but also needed to allow our people to do. And you can imagine at the beginning of social, there were a million reasons to say no. So finding a reason to say yes and addressing all the different stakeholder groups whose preference would have been that we not do this because we're just going to create more work for people and more risk for the firm, right? And what do we do if, all the hypotheticals? It's an organization full of really smart people who are used to problem solving. So they're also used to like understanding where the problems can be. So I think having to communicate across a large group of people like that, the value prop of what we were doing, when the value prop wasn't measurable in dollars, right? The value prop was, I don't know that anybody can imagine an organization today without a social function, but the social functions are different based upon the organization, right? I'm sure, a consumer facing organization needs to be able to respond to angry or dissatisfied consumers in addition to offering offers and promotions and stuff. In B2B, the challenge is a little bit different in a lot of different ways, right? But if you begin to think about B2B as actually B2P, and we're communicating with people, decision makers, how you do that. And so getting an organization to look at that differently was a huge challenge, right? And I, at the end of, many years ago, my email address was on all of our social accounts. It was my email address. Now we have, a long time ago, we shifted over to a group of professional social media, managers and strategists who are making all that happen. And it's lovely and rewarding to see it accepted. And frankly, I don't know that there's anybody there who even remembers that I had anything to do with it, but that's okay. Because just like having people go off and be successful, having projects go off and be successful or become institutionalized is, rewarding.
I would assume bringing social into a company like PwC, that was probably a big culture shift you had to work on. And that is never an easy thing to get there. I'm sure there is a whole discussion we can have around that. But to move forward, I wanted to ask you, can you share an instance where a setback or failure turned out to be a hidden opportunity?
This is one of these life lessons that maybe made me a better manager. But when I was a writer, at that time we did a lot of what we call byline articles for our local partner to distribute to their local publications. And, it would be, sort of seasonally timed or whatever. And I wrote something at the time, it included the word not, so not taxable, so it's taxable, right? It was factually incorrect and it was distributed and it signed off on all the way up the chain, right? So there were loads of hands involved in it, but I was the guy who wrote it and it was wrong. And it was one of those things where I realized maybe on a Sunday afternoon, you were replaying the week or whatever, and it came to me that I think that's wrong. And, I checked and I was wrong. And on Monday morning, I went in and there was no email at this point, right? So I couldn't email somebody and said, hey, I think this is wrong. I had to go in and face to face with the partner who was responsible for all this and said, I made a mistake. And I was pretty sure I was going to get fired. I was pretty sure this was a big deal, right? And this partner basically said, well, what are we going to do about this? We got to fix it. And he literally said these words out loud. I can still hear him talking. Like, we got to fix it. Let's get that out there. Let's file a correction. He's like, I'm not going to say this isn't going to come back and bite us in the ass, but we just got to address the problem first. And so we went ahead and did that. And then, of course, we had the debrief. How did this happen? And, and I'm hanging my head and I'm just waiting. I'm waiting to lose my job because I thought this was such a catastrophic failure. And, from an organization that wants to be right all the time, that issues advice. This was an advice in a letter to a particular client. This was advice in newspapers across the country, right? Little local newspaper, but newspapers nonetheless with other people's names and faces attached to it. So I felt terrible. And going back to trust, or, people are going to trust in these things anymore and whatnot. And the short answer was, well, we just need to be sure this won't happen again. What are we going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again? We need to get another person to look at it, and the person has nothing to do with development. And he had his whole agenda, and that was it. There was no yelling, there was no tantrum, there was no rolling of heads. I got to come into work the next day, still had a job, and recognizing, and this happened several times over 32 years. You can imagine it wasn't a flawless 32 years, right? Things go wrong because I worked with people who understood that when things go wrong, your first responsibility is to get them right and to build in whatever safeguards to be sure that it doesn't happen again. And there wasn't necessarily an eye out, we need to punish the people who did this, this thing wrong. And I, as someone who was treated with, I will say, grace and respect in a difficult situation, that made me such a better leader and more compassionate and more, and just be able to take a step back when bad news came in. And as you know, as a leader, bad news comes in all the time, and people look to how you're going to react to it. And your reaction to bad news typically is directly correlated to how willing people are to bring you the bad news, right? And I want to hear the bad news. And so it's never a shoot the messenger. I have for many, many years been in the, what are we going to do to fix this?
Great lesson in both accountability and self-awareness.
It was, I mean, this partner is, he was instructive in it. And there were a couple other people. I mean, more people were brought into this sort of brouhaha at the time. And everybody, it amazed me how absolutely focused on getting it right people were, rather than getting even, if you will. That was eye-opening to me for a lot of reasons. And it defied sort of the view of a large organization being uncaring and unkind. It was people recognizing that, okay, we got a problem. Let's get on it.
Do you recall a moment in your career that significantly influenced your path?
So on July 1st, 1998, PricewaterhouseCoopers and Library merged. And all around the world, there were parties. This was a big deal, right? Two of the big five were now coming together to form the big four. And so there were parties and there were speeches and there was sort of the scripted, I think, speech that partners were given in the offices. The partner who ran our office talked about the international opportunities, the growth, all the rest of the stuff. So right after that, I went up to him and I said to him that I would be very interested if there were ever an opportunity to work internationally. Went to the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. International worldview was present in me when I was 18 years old, and I remained that way. And that was July 1st, 1998. And sometime in April 1999, he called me into his office and he says, yeah, you remember that time when you said you were interested in going overseas? How'd you like to go to Europe? And I was like, wait, what? And he offered me a job that I stayed in Amsterdam for 5 years doing. And I did several jobs while I was over there. But he gave me that opportunity because it goes back to, if you know what you want, you got to tell somebody what you want. And I told him what I wanted. And he remembered, what was that, 8 months, 7 months later? That was pretty remarkable that he remembered, because this was literally in the middle of a party. We did not have a special scheduled meeting for this. This was, a social celebration. And he remembered, and that changed the trajectory of my life. I don't go to Amsterdam. I probably don't end up running pwc.com. I mean, who knows what I'm doing today?
It's, I think, one of the best pieces of advice also, advocating for yourself. And always ask. If you don't ask, the answer is always no.
And people, I think, I noticed that when people would come to me and they would talk about what they didn't like. And my attitude, if there was something within my control that I could change, fine. But if somebody didn't like their job, and I had a person come in and cry to me about how much they didn't like their job. And I guess the good news is that they trusted me enough to tell me that they didn't like the job that they were doing for me. But I was like, well, I can't really help you with that because we need somebody to do this job. But what do you want to do? And I think that's a piece of advice I would give to everybody. And what do you want to do? Not what do you not want to do? I mean, I think on some, piece of paper, you ought to write down the things that you don't want to do. And every time you're looking for an opportunity, see how many of those items appear in the opportunity, right? But I think it's much more important on that same piece of paper, write down the things that you want to do. Like if you want to do something like social media at PwC, that was not my job description. I felt it was important to start it. I had to ask the right people, and I had to fight all the battles to get it started. But it was something that needed to be done, and it wasn't in my job description. And I think that's the other thing, is you need to make time for the things that are important to you to show somebody that you can actually do those things.
That's a great way to add value, finding things and making them happen for yourself instead of waiting for somebody to come to you. Moving on to a slightly different topic area here, what skills or mindsets have been crucial in navigating twists and turns in your own career?
So I think being curious about things is always helpful. New stuff's always happening, right? I mean, I'm relieved that we've been on the call for as long as we have been and haven't talked about AI. that's an example of how the world is changing. And you, as much as you might want to keep that away, just because it's one more complication to your day. And I talk about, I'll put all technology in that category. You need to be, you need to be mindful of it. You need to be aware of it. You need to have people who are good at it. If you're a leader, don't have the time to dedicate you're not doing, but you need to explore all these things. And some of them, I mean, I think we can look back, is it as far as 2 years ago, we could talk about NFTs in the metaverse, which everybody was having conferences on, right? And now I don't know. I think the best thing that AI has done is pushed NFTs and the metaverse out of the conversation, right? But if you think about the moment that they had and the quick flash, we all had people looking into what it could do for us, and ourselves trying to figure out what is the opportunity here. I think being curious and open minded and recognizing that the world is constantly changing, and you need to be a facilitator of change. And at the same time, the people who work for you, by and large, probably aren't that keen about things changing because they just wonder how it's going to affect them and their jobs. And so being that early awareness detector, and then also kind of a shock absorber to process this stuff, because some things will affect everybody, the internet, cell phones, but other things will only affect, certain people. Not everybody today is a digital designer, is an interactive designer, right? Most people are a digital designer, but so understanding that curiosity, I think, can help you identify what's out there, how it might affect you, and how you can best use it. I think the other thing is I have, I think, a well-developed sense of situational awareness. Like, what are we really here to do? For those of people listening, for yourself, I don't really ever watch Band of Brothers, but there's the second episode of Band of Brothers where the Easy Company gets parachuted into Normandy, and they're all scattered all over the place. And Dick Winters is played by Damian Lewis, is a real life human being. Like, he's a real person. He's not a fictional character. And his whole company is spread out all over the place. The challenge is, okay, what do we do now? How do we do this? And in his head, and I don't know, there's no manifesto that goes on the screen, but it's like, what's the meta mission? And you need somebody to understand the meta mission and communicate that. And in the creative world, if you're in-house, the meta mission is, what does the organization need you to do? And we'll all have people who work for us who are, really accomplished visual artists in many cases, or video artists, people who are, true artists, but there's time for art, and there's time for design, and there's time for the in-house mission. And getting people rallied around that mission, I think, was something I was pretty good at. And walking into a room of executives and not being too precious about anything, to be quite honest with you, to be fluent in the conversation and the language of the organization and what people outside of the creative organization believe is successful, and then internalizing that for your team, I think, is really important.
I really like the meta mission, and I love the analogy there with Band of Brothers.
Only want to hire Dick Winters. That's what I would tell all of my directors. And they look at me and I'd be like, you got to watch this. We need to look for Dick Winters. We need to look for people who, when faced with a confusing situation, take a step back and understand what they're there to do. Because a lot of times understanding what to do is just to say, okay, what do we do? I'm confused. Help me. That would be a totally acceptable answer. And if you watch that episode too, for anyone listening, and it's fantastic.
With hindsight, what would you have done differently in your career?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I was, the past decade or 12 years have been really positive for me. And I think everything you do leads you to a point. And I think I was good enough to course correct. And for example, I divested our organization of some resources, right? The social media team, our communications folks wanted that. And I think that there's a tendency to want to hold on to things. And I was like, no, you should go. The people who ran the website worked for me, because that's what I did when I ran .com. But I was able to say, that really doesn't belong to the digital. That really belongs to the digital marketing team. And people would be like, how can you do that? How can you lose resources? So I think, like, not clinging to things was something that was helpful for me. From a personal perspective, I honestly I don't look back with a lot of regrets, and maybe that's a coping mechanism, but I don't think so.
I think it's honest, and I think that's really a good answer. What advice would you give to somebody earlier in their career who is still trying to figure things out?
I'd say early in your career, you don't know what you don't know. And I don't mean that in a professional sense. I just mean you don't know what's out there. And I often compare it to, I'm big on the analogy, but like shoe shopping. Like what you see online or what you see in a store on the shelf may look great and you put it on and you don't like the way it looks, you don't like the way it feels, or you realize actually you have three pairs of shoes just like that, right? And so I people at the beginning of their career, and my daughters are 28 and 26, so they are at the front end of their careers. And I have told them this, ad nauseum. I don't think they listen to me anymore, but like, you're not stuck in the first job that you have is not the last job that you're going to have. And like, try stuff on. And I know people feel it's a, difficult environment and whatnot, but if you're not happy, you should find something else. But if you're not happy, you should find out why you're not happy. Like, I wasn't happy in my first job as a journalist. And it turned out I liked being a journalist. I just didn't like where I was a journalist. And that was an important realization to me, that it was like, oh, I actually like this work. I just don't like where I'm doing it. And so I think in the in-house community, there's, so many different places you can do it. And I think we both know that every in-house agency is different, and they're custom built to the organization, and find a place that has the values that you have. So when you go to work every day, you see at least yourself reflected in the organization and its values. And then the job itself, just have that peripheral vision. And you may not love what you do, but if you love the organization, you could probably find something else within that organization. And I would also say, for the very young people, before you have a mortgage, before you have a family, you have nothing to lose. Take chances. Take chances with yourself, because you are betting with yourself. Because when you have those other responsibilities, it's just a lot harder to take chances, because you're not just taking chances for yourself.
I mean, happiness is largely on you. And I think if people aren't happy where they are or what they're doing, career, and it's all too short. Find something that does make you happy and go after it, and don't feel bad about it.
100%, right? The happiness piece is totally on you. And, people can be unfair. Bosses aren't always great, but figure it out. Are you unhappy because your boss is making you difficult? Well, then, you need to find a way around that, right? And maybe it is leave, maybe it's find someplace else in the organization. I think that most big places in particular, I compare them to, wine growing regions, and, whether it's France or Napa, that there's the region, right? So Napa is, if you will, the corporate structure, but it's like, which side of the hill are you on? How much sunlight are you getting? How much water are you getting? And little organizations within bigger organizations get different amounts of water and sunlight. Not everything's always equal. So that is also a twisted metaphor, but one I think really, I believe in very seriously.
So just a few more things. One, what do you think the future of design looks like?
I mean, I think that there's going to be, this upheaval as a result of AI. And I think that recognizing where AI can be helpful and as an assistant is fantastic. Where it can take the place of some tasks, I think, is really important. And rather than be afraid of it, I would embrace it. I honestly don't know what the end game is for it, because the issues of things like copyright are they're non-trivial. Right now, they're being treated as as being treated as kind of trivial. But, anybody who works for a large organization, that large organizations are magnets for people wanting to, sort of mine their deep pockets. And I can see somebody using an AI created or generated design that somebody said, well, this is based on a photo I took or a painting I took. I should get paid for that. I think there's lots to be entangled there. I think a lot of I would love to see in AI, a lot of the work that people don't like to do be done by AI, right? And I think that's the idea, I think, for designers, is not to say AI is a threat, I don't want to deal with it. It's to say, okay, what can it do for me? How can I harness it? I mean, look, as a photographer, Adobe has built in some wonderful AI helpers to do things like get rid of noise in photographs. Is it really manipulating the photograph? I mean, if we were in a dark room, you could do it, right? You would manipulate it that way. I don't feel at all unethical using that little feature in promo here for Adobe, but that's what I use. And I see it. It's not theoretical. It's not the future. It's today. It's been today for, several months now. But I do think that it's an interesting question about if one of my daughters were interested in going to into design as a career, what would I recommend? And I'm not actually sure of what I'd recommend. I mean, I keep jokingly telling people, yeah, I'd say go be a plumber or an electrician or a carpenter because I can't do that, right? What if they what but it is, if you look at it, you're still going to need people in the loop to do things. And you're going to need talented people to recognize good from bad, functional from non-functional. Things like, human-centered design require humans to make some decisions about that.
I really like to believe that people understand people, and to get to a final outcome, you really do need a person.
And we've seen technology replace groups of people. I mentioned my friend who worked on Maisel, and one of the scenes in Maisel takes place in a department store, and there's women, all women, at a switchboard moving cables in and out of, and doing the old 1950s switchboard thing, right? And that job doesn't exist anymore. I mean, I just tried to call, a bank this morning, and of course went through the interactive voice response and all those things. There's nobody there plugging in. So those careers, those jobs have gone away, but other jobs have come to replace it. They're not doing the same thing. There's just other jobs, right? And I think look for where those other jobs might develop in the wake of all of this.
Okay, so what is your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is kind of homemade. I believe that everybody should get what they want, and the first step to getting what you want is to knowing what you want. And I think that is a big leap, right? And like I'm not happy. Well, great. What do you want? And then to know what you want, to get what you want, then you need to tell somebody what you want. So I don't want to reference myself. I'm not necessarily good at quoting other people, but to me it's just a good credo to live by.
You should definitely quote yourself. That's a good one. There's a lot of really good content out there. Is there anything that you're looking at that you would want to recommend to others?
I am a voracious consumer of content, but I have my reliable sources that are not, really anything extraordinary. I think they're probably pretty much in the mainstream. I'm a big nonfiction reader, and one of the books I'm reading now, I'm loving, and it's more of a tome than a book, and it's The Power Broker, and it's about Robert Caro and New York City, basically in the 20th century. And for anybody who wants to understand like human nature and how large organizations work and how individuals can make a difference, both positively and negatively in organizations, I would recommend that 100%. It is fascinating. It's enraging. It's truly enraging to read it, because as a New Yorker who drives along the highways that Robert Moses built, not realizing as I'm driving over them, or not having realized as I was driving over them, the true cost of some of this stuff. And I'm not talking about financial, the social cost. And it's amazing. And so, and it's also a lesson in like the level of, I'll call it monomania it takes to get some big things done, right? How difficult it is to get big things done. But that to me is, it's a 1,200 page read.
It sounds pretty awesome. I will check that out. And last thing, where can people find you?
Okay, so I am on Instagram. I have two different Instagram handles. One is Jack the number 2 BER, and that's for my sort of day-to-day content. And then I have my photography account as my actual name, Jack Teuber, and I just recently started that. I'm also on Threads. I was on Twitter, but I'm no longer on there. And that's really where I am on the socials.
Jack, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for being a friend. Thank you for all of the great insight. I think this was a really good one.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. Great talking to you.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our content today, please like, subscribe, and comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time.